On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected. James Caan, the rugged, charismatic actor best known for his iconic role as Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, passed away from a heart attack on July 6, 2022, at the age of 82. His death marked the loss of one of Hollywood's enduring tough guy personas, whose work left an indelible mark on American cinema from the 1970s onward. Caan's passing was natural, but it symbolized the fading of a golden era of filmmaking, one defined by complex male archetypes and gritty storytelling. Caan's career emerged during a time of cultural transformation in the United States. The 1970s was an era of post-Vietnam War disillusionment and shifting social values. In films like The Godfather, 1972, Caan helped embody a raw masculinity that was both alluring and tragic. His portrayal of Sonny, a volatile, fiercely loyal mobster, reflected the contradictions of an age wrestling with authority, family, and power. The violent death of Sonny in the film was one of cinema's most shocking and memorable scenes, and in many ways, it mirrored the chaos and violence that often accompanied real-world power struggles of the time. When Caan died, tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment world. His loss was felt not only as the passing of a beloved actor, but as the closing chapter of a cinematic tradition. Though his later years were quieter, he remained a symbol of the no-nonsense, emotionally charged acting style that once dominated Hollywood. For fans and peers alike, his death served as a reminder of the enduring power of storytelling rooted in authenticity and emotional complexity. The immediate consequence of his passing was a wave of reflection on his roles, his influence, and the legacy of The Godfather itself, a film so foundational that it continues to inform how we understand character, violence, and morality in cinema. Caan's death did not alter history's course, but it amplified the reverence for a body of work that helped shape modern film narratives. In death, we remember James Caan through the roles that made him immortal. His images replayed on screen, his performances studied and imitated. His legacy lives on in the grit of modern anti-heroes and in the reverence with which his generation of actors is held. Through film, we make peace with mortality, preserving spirit and story even as the person fades from life. Caan's death reminds us that while life is fleeting, a powerful performance can echo through eternity. Louis Armstrong, one of the most influential figures in American music, passed away from a heart attack on July 6, 1971, at the age of 69. His death, though natural, marked the end of an era in which jazz evolved from the dance halls of New Orleans to a globally celebrated art form. Known affectionately as Satchmo, or Pops, Armstrong's life and death reflect the challenges and triumphs of Black artists navigating fame, racism, and cultural transformation in the 20th century. Armstrong's passing occurred at a time when the United States was still reeling from the civil rights struggles of the 1960s. As a Black musician who rose to stardom in a segregated America, Armstrong often walked a tightrope, bringing joy to audiences worldwide, while being criticized by some for not being politically outspoken enough. Yet, his contribution to racial progress cannot be understated. His international fame helped break down racial barriers in music and paved the way for future generations of Black performers. The immediate aftermath of Armstrong's death was a wave of mourning that extended far beyond the United States. Tributes poured in from around the world, honoring not just a jazz trumpeter and singer, but a cultural ambassador whose artistry had uplifted millions. His funeral, held in New York City, drew a crowd of admirers, from fellow musicians to fans who had never met him, but felt as if they knew him through his timeless music and infectious smile. Armstrong's death did not just close a chapter in music history, it solidified his legend. Songs like "What a Wonderful World" and "Hello, Dolly" gained renewed emotional depth, casting him as a symbol of optimism, resilience, and creative brilliance. His gravelly voice and virtuosic trumpet playing became touchstones for both nostalgia and inspiration. In death, Armstrong became immortalized not only in recordings and archival footage, but in the naming of cultural institutions, statues, and educational programs. His home in Queens, New York, was turned into a museum, preserving his legacy for future generations. Through art and memory, we continue to celebrate Armstrong not just as a musician, but as a man whose life testified to the power of joy in the face of adversity. Louis Armstrong's passing reminds us that greatness transcends mortality. In the end, his music became more than entertainment. It became a lens through which we understand history, perseverance, and the soul of a nation. Marshia P. Johnson, a trailblazing activist and central figure in the LGBTQ+ rights movement, died under mysterious circumstances on July 6, 1992. Her body was found floating in the Hudson River in New York City. Though initially ruled a suicide, the suspicious nature of her death, combined with accounts of prior harassment, sparked outcry among activists and prompted a later reopening of the case. Whether her death was accidental, violent, or the result of neglect remains unresolved, reflecting the systemic marginalization and lack of institutional support for trans women of color during that era. Johnson was a pillar of the post-Stonewall LGBTQ+ liberation movement. As a black transgender woman, drag performer, and co-founder of the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR, alongside Sylvia Rivera, she advocated for the rights of queer and homeless youth at a time when few others did. Her life was one of joyful defiance in the face of brutality, poverty, and exclusion. Her death, therefore, was not just the loss of a beloved community figure, it was a chilling reminder of the vulnerability faced by trans individuals in the 1990s, particularly those of color. The immediate consequence of her passing was heartbreak and outrage within the LGBTQ+ community. Yet in the broader public, her death received minimal attention, a silence that mirrored how often queer voices were erased. However, over time, Johnson's legacy grew. As interest in LGBTQ+ history surged in the 21st century, she became recognized as a symbol of resistance and inclusion, her image increasingly invoked at pride marches, in murals, documentaries like The Death and Life of Marshia P. Johnson, and even proposed statues in her honor. Her death ultimately amplified her legend. It fueled renewed calls for justice and visibility for transgender people and highlighted ongoing failures in law enforcement and healthcare systems. The re-examination of her case in the 2010s paralleled a broader reckoning with police violence, social inequality, and institutional transphobia. Marshia P. Johnson's death, and the questions that remain around it, reveals how society often fails its most vulnerable while also showing the power of memory and storytelling in reclaiming history. Through art, activism, and education, Johnson has been transformed from a forgotten casualty into a revered icon. Her enduring presence in today's fight for equality demonstrates how death can spark deeper reflection and how a life once silenced can echo louder in its absence than ever in its presence. Robert McNamara, a central figure in American political and military history, died of natural causes on July 6, 2009, at the age of 93. His passing marked the end of a complex and controversial legacy, largely defined by his tenure as U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War. His death, though quiet and expected due to age-related health decline, invited renewed scrutiny of his role in shaping 20th century warfare and government accountability. McNamara's career spanned from being a corporate executive at Ford Motor Company to becoming a leading architect of Cold War military strategy under Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. As Secretary of Defense from 1961 to 1968, he was known for bringing a technocratic, data-driven approach to military policy. However, this same method led to one of his most controversial contributions: escalating U.S. involvement in Vietnam based on flawed assumptions about communism, military might, and geopolitical control. His death reignited debates over the morality and consequences of the Vietnam War. In his later years, McNamara had admitted many of his decisions were gravely mistaken, an acknowledgement that came too late for many veterans and families affected by the war. In his 1995 memoir, In Retrospect, he wrote, "We were wrong, terribly wrong," a statement that haunted public discourse for years and was cited again in obituaries and retrospectives following his death. His admission reflected a rare but significant shift in how power and accountability were discussed at the highest levels of government. The immediate consequence of McNamara's passing was a wave of reflection, both condemning and analyzing his role. For some, he was a tragic figure, a man trapped by the bureaucratic machine he once mastered. For others, his legacy was a cautionary tale about unchecked power and the dangers of abstracting human cost through statistics. Robert McNamara's death underscores humanity's uneasy relationship with mortality and memory, especially for those who wield immense influence. His life became immortalized through documentaries like The Fog of War and countless historical analyses, not for heroism, but for the lasting impact of flawed decisions. We commemorate such figures not to glorify, but to learn, to confront the cost of power and the imperative of reflection. His legacy serves as a mirror for future leaders, reminding us that human lives must never become mere variables in the equations of war. William Faulkner, one of America's most celebrated novelists, died of a heart attack on July 6, 1962, at the age of 64 in Byhalia, Mississippi. His death marked the close of a literary era that grappled with the fractured identity of the American South. Though his passing was due to natural causes, it came at a time when the cultural values Faulkner had long explored, race, memory, and decay, were being violently contested in real life through the civil rights movement. His death symbolically punctuated the transition from a haunted Southern past into an uncertain but hopeful future. Faulkner had spent decades chronicling the complexities of Southern life through his fictional Yoknapatawpha County. His narratives were layered with stream-of-consciousness techniques, fractured timelines, and morally conflicted characters, hallmarks of modernist literature. By the time of his death, Faulkner had received the Nobel Prize in Literature, 1949, 2 Pulitzer Prizes, and wide international acclaim. Yet he remained a deeply private man, occasionally misunderstood and increasingly reclusive in his later years. His sudden death followed a fall from a horse, an accident from which he never fully recovered, mirroring the slow, inevitable decline he so often depicted in his characters. The immediate reaction to Faulkner's death was a solemn acknowledgement of the loss of a literary giant. Yet unlike the fanfare following the deaths of celebrities or public figures, Faulkner's passing resonated more quietly, deeply felt within literary and academic circles. His work was already considered dense and difficult, but his death catalyzed a surge in scholarly interest and analysis, elevating his legacy into the literary canon with renewed intensity. Faulkner's death did not alter the course of history in a political sense, but it amplified the reverence for his cultural contributions. His novels became essential reading in American literature courses. his themes dissected for their insights into human nature and societal failure. Monuments, museum exhibits in Oxford, Mississippi, and adaptations of his work continued to preserve his legacy. In reflecting on Faulkner's death, we confront humanity's deep entanglement with memory and decay, themes central to his writing. He understood that power lies not in conquest, but in remembrance. Through literature, Faulkner remains immortal, his voice echoing in the questions we continue to ask about identity, guilt, and the passage of time. His legacy endures not through spectacle, but through the slow, powerful undercurrent of enduring truth. Cameron Boyce, a rising star beloved by a generation, died unexpectedly on July 6, 2019, at the age of 20. His death, attributed to a sudden epileptic seizure due to an ongoing medical condition, shocked fans and the entertainment world alike. As someone who represented youthful optimism and creative promise, his passing at such a young age struck a deeply emotional chord, highlighting both the fragility of life and the often hidden battles individuals face behind the scenes. Boyce had already made a significant mark in Hollywood by the time of his death. Known for his roles in Disney Channel hits such as Jessie and the Descendants franchise, he embodied the new wave of diverse and energetic talent. Off-screen, he was admired for his humanitarian efforts, particularly his commitment to ending gun violence and promoting clean water access. His death, therefore, resonated beyond the realm of entertainment. It disrupted the narrative of an actor just beginning to channel his platform for greater social good. The circumstances of Boyce's death reflect a modern challenge, the disconnect between public persona and private health. In an era where social media often constructs polished versions of reality, the news that someone so young and vibrant could pass away in his sleep served as a sobering reminder that mortality knows no age or fame. His death triggered an outpouring of grief and reflection, especially among young people who had grown up watching him. The immediacy of their emotional response was emblematic of how celebrity culture has become deeply intertwined with personal identity and digital connection. In the wake of his death, the Cameron Boyce Foundation was established by his family to continue his philanthropic vision. Through initiatives focusing on epilepsy awareness, youth empowerment, and arts education, the foundation became a living legacy, transforming tragedy into action. Disney paid tribute with on-screen dedications, and fans organized memorials and charity drives in his honor. Cameron Boyce's death reminds us that even lives brief in length can be rich in impact. We immortalize figures like him through stories, charitable causes, and the inspiration they leave behind. In doing so, we reaffirm the enduring human desire to preserve memory and extract meaning from loss, finding light in darkness and purpose in pain. Ennio Moriconei, the legendary Italian composer whose sweeping scores redefined film music, passed away on July 6, 2020, at the age of 91. He died in Rome after complications from a fall that caused a femur fracture. Despite the natural causes surrounding his death, the quiet dignity with which he passed was in keeping with his lifelong avoidance of Hollywood excess. Morricone's passing marked the end of a cultural epoch, where music was not merely a background element, but a force that shaped cinematic narrative and emotional depth. Morricone's career spanned over 6 decades and more than 500 film and television scores. He became synonymous with the spaghetti western genre through his work with director Sergio Leone, particularly with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where his innovative use of whistling, gunshots, and electric guitars created a soundscape unlike anything before. His death came at a time when the entertainment industry was undergoing transformation, from analog to digital, from orchestra to algorithm, and reminded the world of the irreplaceable artistry that only a human soul can compose. The immediate consequences of his death were global tributes and reflections from filmmakers, musicians, and fans. Directors such as Quentin Tarantino, who had long championed Moricone's genius, hailed him as a titan of the art form. The Italian state honored him with a private funeral, as per his wishes, but national mourning spread far beyond Italy's borders. In an age dominated by synthetic sound and streaming algorithms, his passing stirred a longing for authenticity and craftsmanship. Moricone's death amplified the legend he had carefully built, not by self-promotion, but by the profound emotional resonance of his music. He had only won his first competitive Academy Award in 2016, decades after his most iconic works, underscoring the disconnect between commercial recognition and enduring artistic impact. What Moricone's death reveals about humanity is our deep need to feel. Through art, especially music, we grapple with memory, heroism, love, and loss. His compositions continue to evoke these emotions across generations. We immortalize him not just in concert halls or award ceremonies, but every time a film score makes our hearts race or our eyes tear up. Ennio Moriconei proved that even without words, music can etch a legacy into the soul of culture, and it is through such legacies that memory defies mortality. Casey Rogers, best remembered for her role as Louise Tate on the beloved television series Bewitched, passed away on July 6, 2006 at the age of 80. Her death was attributed to complications from a stroke, marking the close of a life that quietly shaped mid-20th century American entertainment. Rogers' passing, though peaceful and natural, marked the end of an era in which women in Hollywood were both redefining and being confined by rapidly evolving cultural norms. Born Josie Imogene Rogers, she began her career under the stage name Laura Elliott, working steadily in film noir and B-movies of the 1940s and 50s before transitioning to television. It was on Bewitched, a show deeply emblematic of its time, that Rogers became a familiar face in millions of American households. Her portrayal of Louise, the witty and supportive wife of an advertising executive, reflected the tensions of the 1960s. Women were navigating new professional and personal roles, even within the boundaries of domestic sitcoms. Rogers' death didn't make international headlines, but among fans and pop culture historians, it sparked reflection on how television shaped and mirrored American values. Her role, supportive yet sharp, stylish yet grounded, embodied the transitional woman of the post-war era, neither as traditional as her predecessors, nor as radically independent as later feminist icons. In many ways, her passing symbolized the quiet fade-out of a generation of actresses who helped build television's golden age. While Rogers did not receive the same legendary status as some of her contemporaries, her career has been preserved in the growing appreciation for mid-century television. In her later years, she dedicated herself to motorsports advocacy, helping bring women into racing through her work with the Powder Puff Derby, a bold extension of her belief in women's capacity to break stereotypes. Her death reminds us that not all legacies are written in headlines. Some are threaded through everyday culture, quietly influencing perceptions over decades. Rogers' life and death speak to our collective yearning to be remembered for our contribution, even if it isn't revolutionary. We immortalize figures like her through syndicated reruns, nostalgic retrospectives, and the continued relevance of the stories they helped tell. In these quiet echoes, we find a reminder of how memory and meaning are often shaped not by the spotlight, but by the warmth of familiarity. Martin Charney, best known as the creator, lyricist, and original director of the musical Annie, passed away on July 6, 2019, at the age of 84. He died following a heart attack, bringing an end to a life steeped in the rhythms of Broadway and the optimism of musical theater. His death was natural and peaceful, but it echoed with a poignant symbolism, the departure of one of the last great showmen of a golden era of American stage storytelling. Charney began his career as a performer, notably appearing as a jet in the original Broadway production of West Side Story. But his true genius emerged behind the scenes as a lyricist and director. In 1977, Annie premiered, introducing audiences to the red-haired orphan whose hopefulness captured the American spirit during the economic anxieties of the late 1970s. The show's signature song, Tomorrow, became a cultural anthem of perseverance and faith in better days. A message that resonated during a time of inflation, political distrust, and generational change. Charney's passing marked not just the end of a career, but the loss of an artistic voice that believed in the power of joy and resilience through song. The immediate response to his death was reverent. Broadway theaters paid tribute, and fans across generations reflected on the enduring warmth of Annie. His influence had become so deeply ingrained in American entertainment that even those unfamiliar with his name could still hum his lyrics. His death, while not shocking or controversial, prompted a reassessment of how theater shapes national consciousness. Charney created characters who believed in hope not because life was easy, but because it was necessary. In that way, his work reflected the challenges of an America striving to redefine itself through economic and social upheaval. Ultimately, Martin Charney's legacy endures not only in revivals of Annie, but also in countless community theaters, school stages, and cultural references that continue to celebrate the power of optimism. His passing reminds us that mortality does not silence those who give voice to our collective dreams. We immortalize such figures through the art they leave behind, songs sung across time, stories that lift us in dark moments, and legacies that remind us that even in uncertainty, the sun will come out tomorrow. Thomas More, a towering figure of the English Renaissance, met a violent and deeply symbolic end on July 6, 1535. Executed by beheading at the command of King Henry VIII, More's death came as a direct result of his refusal to accept the king as the supreme head of the Church of England. His principled stand against the Act of Supremacy and his opposition to the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon sealed his fate. More's execution was not only the tragic end of a devout Catholic and respected humanist, but also a reflection of the intense religious and political upheaval of 16th century England. At a time when monarchs sought to consolidate both secular and spiritual power, More's insistence on moral integrity and loyalty to the Pope made him a threat to royal authority. His death became a cautionary tale in the battle between conscience and compliance, and his final words, "I die the king's good servant and God's first," echoed the tension between civic duty and spiritual allegiance. The immediate consequence of his execution was to further entrench Henry's supremacy over the Church and intimidate others who might have resisted the English Reformation. But More's martyrdom had a paradoxical effect. It elevated his legacy far beyond what he may have achieved in life. To Catholics, he became a saint, canonized in 1935 by Pope Pius XI, and a symbol of moral courage. To historians and scholars, he remains a complex figure, the author of Utopia, a champion of education, yet also a man who, during his time as Lord Chancellor, persecuted Protestant heretics. More's death reveals much about humanity's struggle with the limits of power and the cost of integrity. His story has been immortalized in art and literature, most famously in Robert Bolt's A Man for All Seasons, which portrays More as the ultimate man of principle, unwavering in the face of tyranny. Statues, biographies, and films continue to celebrate his resistance and reflect on the price of faith in an age of absolutism. In the end, Thomas More's death reminds us that while empires may bend truth to their will, history often vindicates those who uphold it. His life and legacy underscore how society remembers not only what individuals did, but why they were willing to die for it.